Hi, my name is Katie Takianagi, and I'm a fellow of Orton-Gillingham. I have a tutoring and teacher training practice called Alphabet City Tutors, and I'm based in Brooklyn, New York. But I do most of my training remotely, so I get to work with teachers from all different parts of the country and even sometimes other countries, and from all around New York who just don't need to leave their houses to train with me. I wanted to just make a pretty short video explaining the basics of how I set up my associate level Orton-Gillingham training and some of the requirements of the course, because when I talk to people who are interested in training, these are really important questions that they have, and it's a big investment of time and money. And so I really want people to know what they're getting themselves into before they start training or choose the right course for them. So if this is interesting to you, you might also want to watch my video that just goes over the differences between training at the classroom educator level, the associate level, and the certified level. And then I also just have a quick overview of Orton-Gillingham, what it is, a little bit of the history, what we cover in our lessons, some of the teaching principles that we follow, if you're just sort of looking into OG and wanting to learn more. So I am going to go through the different parts of these requirements. This is from the Orton-Gillingham Academy's requirements for associate level training. And at the top, actually, you'll see that the minimum requirement for education, once you get to applying for certification, the OGA actually requires that you have at least a bachelor's degree in order to be eligible for this level of certification. Your bachelor's can be in any area. It doesn't have to be in something education related. Okay, so let me tell you about the coursework hour requirement. So at the associate level, the course is 70 hours. The way that I break up those 70 hours is the first 50 hours are what I call pre-practicum coursework hours, because we do them before you start your practicum. I chunk those into 2 weeks during the summer. We meet 5 hours a day, Monday through Friday, for 2 weeks. And so we get those 50 hours done. And by the time you finish those hours, you actually are ready to start tutoring. So you know how to assess your students when you get started with them. You know how to write lesson plans. You know a lot about the teaching principles, about different areas that we cover in our lessons. The remaining 20 hours I call practicum seminars. Those happen over 5 Saturdays that we spread throughout the school year, because by that time you're going to be doing your practicum teaching. So I think it's important to break up the coursework so that it's not all taught before you start the practicum. I think that you get a little bit different information from some of that coursework if you're actually in the trenches doing the teaching while you're doing it. So it's obviously important for you to get a lot of information before you get started, but then to come back to it, it's a lot of information that we cover during the summer. So some of what we do on those Saturdays is a little bit of review from the summer. We also talk about issues and questions that are coming up now that you're actually teaching. We, especially towards the end of those meetings, we look at the requirements of the application in detail, because it is an in-depth application process. So we examine the rubrics, we look at examples. I want to make sure that you feel like you know what you're doing and you're comfortable going into the application process towards the end of the practicum. Also, I think of this as a cohort model. So working with the same group of teachers over the course of the whole school year, rather than seeing them for an intensive amount of time and then not seeing them again, gives you an opportunity to build relationships with these other practitioners as well. So even though we meet remotely, I do think that people get to know each other pretty well over the course of the year. During our meetings, we do collaborative work as well as independent work, work in partnership, in small groups, and a lot of people are in touch outside of class, studying together, sharing resources. So this also gives you an opportunity to really connect with the other practitioners in your cohort. The practicum, I really try to set it up as flexibly as possible. So we meet the requirements of the academy for the associate level practicum, but I work with teachers who are Sometimes they're working in schools as classroom teachers, maybe as special educators or reading specialists. I also work with people who are in private practice who may already have a tutoring practice and want to be specializing in OG. I work with people who are changing careers and maybe aren't coming from an education background. Also, a lot of people in related fields like speech and language pathology, sometimes neuropsychologists, occupational therapists, and sometimes parents who have gotten interested in Orton-Gillingham because they've seen how it's benefited their children. So people are in a lot of different settings and planning to use their practicum work in different ways. And so, I really work with everyone to try to make this as flexible as possible to work for whatever your setting is. So there's a 100-hour requirement. Really, it's not 100 hours, it's 100 lessons, since sometimes OG lessons are less than an hour long. And that needs to happen over at least 8 consecutive months. So the 8 months is a minimum, not a maximum. You can't just squeeze your 100 lessons or 100 hours in a few months if you're doing lots of OG teaching, for example. But there are definitely many people who take more than the 8 months to complete the practicum, either because maybe they're only working with one student twice a week, and so it's going to take longer than a school year to accrue the 100 lessons. Or things come up, people have lives outside of the training. So again, that's a minimum of 8 consecutive months, but it's totally fine for you to continue your practicum over more than one school year. For the size of the group, at the associate level, the work is really focused on one-on-one instruction. However, there is an allowance if you are working in a school and you have a small group and you want to be doing OG with that small group, then you may use up to 30 of your hours with that group and up to 3 of your 10 observations to be focused on your small group work. And the small group can be a group of 2 or 3 students. So it does need to stay very small so that you can still be doing that diagnostic and prescriptive teaching. Really, even if you do your practicum all working one-on-one with students, you can still use what you learn from the practicum in a group setting. If you know that you plan to do that and you're working with a group during the time of the practicum, then it can be really nice to have some of that work be focused on the group and get some feedback on your work with the group, because there are sometimes some little differences in how you might execute certain lesson procedures or, different types of issues that can come up when you're working with a group of students rather than one-on-one. But this is a flexible credential, so even if you don't do group work during your practicum, you can still work with groups in the future. The instructional sessions are 40 to 60 minutes. If you're in a school setting, for example, and you have 30-minute blocks multiple times a week with your students, you can split a lesson up over 2 days. So you could have 4 30-minute sessions a week, and that could fulfill the 2 complete sessions a week requirement. We see our students at least twice a week on non-consecutive days. What we don't want to happen is that you see your students 2 days in a row and then they don't have any OG for 5 days. But if you're able to see your students more frequently than twice a week, then the non-consecutive days isn't an issue. There's also a requirement of 10 observations over the course of the practicum. So we spread those out throughout the practicum. We work on your schedule, and you get written and oral feedback. And really, you have time in between each observation to implement the feedback from the previous observation. And, over the course of the year, you're going to be teaching a range of things. And so I get to observe you at different points in your teaching, so you get feedback on teaching different kinds of skills. For the actual application, one additional requirement is that you complete all of the readings on the associate level reading list, and that's a list that's created by the OGA. Everyone in my course is a part of a Google Classroom, and so I assign the readings over the course of the coursework and practicum, and I have some other assignments sometimes. Then the actual application consists of a profile that you write for the student that you're working with during the practicum, where you're really giving background on who this student is as a learner, their academic history, their medical history, a lot of the same types of information that you would see in a neuropsych eval or a psychoeducational eval. But it's okay if your student does not have formal testing. You would gather a lot of that same information from talking to the family. And just so you know, it's anonymous. You're not using your student's name in this. This is really just to describe who your student is as a learner, to show that then in your lesson trio, which is the other part of the application, that you know how to do the diagnostic and prescriptive teaching that's really tailored to your particular student that's expected of you at the associate level. So you submit, in addition to the profile, a sequence of 3 lessons towards the end of your practicum that you did with that student, and you annotate the middle lesson. You're really describing in detail in those annotations what you did for each part of the lesson, what the student did. If the student made an error, how did you respond to the error? The reason that the application is in this format is because traditionally you would then submit your application to the certifying committee. The certifying committee is a group of 12 fellows who volunteer their time to review people's applications and compare them, to the standards of the rubrics, and basically determine if they meet the standards for certification. Those fellows wouldn't know you, they wouldn't know your student, they wouldn't have seen any of your observations. So the profile really would tell them who your student is, and then your annotations would really describe for them what you do in a lesson and demonstrate your skill as an OG practitioner. There are accredited training programs and accredited training fellows who actually have the ability to review their trainees' applications and sort of stand in for the certifying committee. I'm an accredited training fellow, so I serve as the certifying committee for the people I train. But we still meet the same standards, use the same rubric, do all of the same things that people do when they submit their applications to the certifying committee. When they're applying to me as an accredited training fellow. And then once you have your associate level certification, you are qualified to work either with students one-on-one, or again, you can work with groups. You can work in school or outside of school. So you are really qualified to do that one-on-one tutoring, or, in a school setting, even one-on-one intervention once you have this certification. In addition to getting the associate level certification from the Orton-Gillingham Academy, there are a few other things that I can offer for people if this is useful to them. It's a lot of work to take this course, so I want people to get as much benefit from it as possible. So one thing is that I have a partnership with Adams State University. They will allow people who successfully complete the course and all the requirements and are at the stage of getting certification to purchase graduate credits. You can purchase 5 graduate credits, and this is usually useful for teachers who are in a system where graduate credits will make you eligible for salary increases. So that's one option. And then I have several free options. If you're a speech and language pathologist, then ASHA will recognize our course for 80 credit hours between the 70 hours of coursework and then the 10 observations. If you are certified as a teacher in the state of New York, I'm a CTLE credit provider, and so I can give you a certificate for 80 hours, again, for the 70 hours of coursework and then the 10 observations. If you're certified in Rhode Island, I'm a Right to Read approved provider, so you can use the completion of the coursework and the practicum towards that credential. Or if you're anywhere else and you need a letter from me when you finish this course, just verifying the work that you've done, I'm obviously happy to provide that, because again, I want you to get as much benefit from taking this course as possible. So I hope that this gave you some insight into how I structure my course. Different fellows and different training institutions might take those same OGA requirements and set them up a little bit differently. So, things can be done sort of at the discretion of your fellow, whomever you train with, but this is just an overview of how my course works. If you would like to talk to me more or find out more, ask me questions, you're welcome to reach out. Here's my email, Katie at alphabetcitytutors.com. You can also go on my website, and I usually have the most up-to-date version of the brochure for whatever my upcoming associate level course is. And I hope, again, that this was helpful to you, and I'd love to hear from you. Thanks.